So I've just got onto this Edward Coke book, basically. But the third, I'm interested in the one about, obviously the political rights and the jurisdiction of Parliament itself to do with all our cases. But the third book in the series has got lots of criminal offences in it. And it's really interesting to read these criminal offences just for the basis and origin of them, right? But the first one in the whole thing is treason and high treason, right? A lot of people have been accusing Keir Starmer, of treason and people in the government, right? But I was curious to actually know what the treason is meant to be originally, right? Properly, like the traditional or the historical sort of ideology of what even treason and high treason is, right? And I was just looking in this third. You can read these online, you don't have to get the book. The third in the series, right? And it basically centres around plotting to kill, like even intending to or compassing to basically to possibly even to think of, to imagine, it says here, right? Even to the compassing or imagining of, right? So basically the compassing or imagining even of killing, right? The king, queen, or a prince, right? Or declaring some same of a deed. And then you've got the actual killing and murder of, like, these are people, like, these are ministers, right? So the Chancellor, Treasurer, Justices of benches, certain particular justices. So Chancellor, Treasurer, and certain justices. But in relation to their office in government, right? In their places, in their offices. So that's when they're actually serving in government. I don't know if it means the same if they were out hunting, right? So, like if they're in the woods hunting and they're not, it's nothing to do with them being at work or in their job, right? Let's say, that there's like some hunting incident or accident, or no, not because an accident is not actually intending to murder someone, but like, let's say, example, if I don't know, like a highwayman attacked them or something like that when they're on the way somewhere and they ended up getting killed in their own sort of private life. This is the thing. Maybe like in a bar brawl, right? So if they're if they're going about their own private life and they get into an argument in a pub or club or something like that and they end up getting killed, they're not... This is a little bit like the difference between sort of like when you're out, doing these political causes and we're meant to be privileged, but they're not classing it as that we are acting on behalf of a parliamentary or government cause. It's just like a private crime or offence, right? So the treason thing, if they ended up getting killed or being killed because of a governmental issue, now this is a little bit like the Terrorism Act offences as well, right? But apparently, obviously someone could follow them or stalk them or whatever, supposedly, and, kill them when they're going about their private life, right? But make out that it was an incident or an accident. But this is the thing. There is a possibility that, they might have got into an argument on the spur of the moment in some incident and got killed, right? So that is not treason, but this is obviously what you got to prove in a court, right? This is the whole point of evidence and like a case, right? Like what a prosecution have got to prove it, right? So if the Chancellor or the Treasurer or one of these justices was out and about in their own private life, doing something in their own private life, and they got into some kind of fight or incident. Just like, I don't know if like he bumped into someone and he started arguing with him and he ended up getting killed because of that, right? That's not treason. But if someone somehow went after him or, plotted to kill them in their office working, but not actually in the office itself, but, in the proceedings of work. I mean, look, have you seen, like, for example, sometimes you see, like, the press walking after Rees-Mogg down the road, and he's actually, he's in, Rees-Mogg is going somewhere for government, right, to a meeting for government purposes, right, or he's on his way to some sort of debate or something, and the newspapers are walking down the road following him, like he's on his way to Parliament, right, things like that. That is classed as in office, because, he's working in office, so... But the thing about these is this, right, and then you've also got, here, right, the second concern of violation is the violate or currently known. So you've got the king's consort and queen, the king's eldest daughter, unmarried, and the princess's wife. But then you've got this last, the third is levying war against the king, right? So that's actually going to actual proper war, which is not using... When you are actually using legal process, which is like canvassing and making requests of the government using a matter of record and writ, petitioning, right? And you're opposing the government lawfully, or you're actually bringing a cause or case to the government, and certain crimes and offences can be privileged to that. Like, the Criminal Damage Act, right, is separate from malicious damage, which is to buildings and things like that. The Criminal Damage Act definitely is, without question, privilege. But this is the thing, it's to do with bringing it into the matter of Parliament. Now, this is the thing with this, right? I don't want to make this complicated, but obviously, having an armed force or having arms, if it's for defence, is lawful, right? If you're being acted on or against unlawfully, which the police are doing now, by the way, there's no doubt about that. The police have been acting unlawfully against people, right, and arresting people unlawfully, particularly on those terrorism charges, and lots of petitioners as well, right? They're breaking the law, right? And this is the thing. But if you, put together an armed force or an army in to take the government by force, take over the government or take control of it, not by election or not by appointment, or, by force or whatever, then that's the thing. But at the moment, actually, the courts are the ones who have been acting illegally against people, prosecuting people illegally, and the police have been. So they're the ones who've actually been breaking the law. But it doesn't say that there's necessarily high treason, though. That is contempt. It falls under the contempt and the contempt of Parliament, right? So the police and so forth are in contempt, but this is the thing. That Terrorism Act 2000 has got offences where if they disturb democratic processes, right? If they disrupt and obstruct democratic processes and act as a body or force, then that falls under the Terrorism Act. But the thing is, the police and the CPS and so forth haven't actually been prescribed, right? They haven't actually been prescribed. And when they disrupt political processes, it's actually, it doesn't need to be a terrorism act, it's actually contempt, right? Which is quite serious. So it's already contempt of Parliament, right? So it doesn't need to be doesn't need to be in the Terrorism Act. I don't know if they can be prescribed or not, because when the police are acting, they're acting in a legal process, but the 2000 Terrorism Act doesn't say whether or not legal privilege applies. The 2006 and 2008 Act do say that legal privilege applies. So does it apply to the 2000 Act as well? I don't know. That's a good question that we need to find out officially. We need to officially find that out, because that means you can actually prescribe the police, right? The police could be prescribed. I don't know whether or not you can prescribe political parties or not, because they're engaged in processes of law to Parliament. But that means that you can't prescribe, like, that Burning Pink party that Roger Hallam had, right? They can't be prescribed. If you can't prescribe the Labour Party, and if you can't prescribe the Conservative Party, then, you can't prescribe, like, the Burning Pink or, say, for example, Britain First, either. So that's something to check and clear up, because the 2000 Act, Terrorism Act, doesn't make that clear. only the 2000 and the following preceding acts say that, you know, it's exempt from legal privilege, right? So if it's parliamentary privilege, that would cover political parties, right? But it doesn't say in the 2000 Act, so that I think that needs to be cleared up and clarified, because the police, right? If the police are arresting these protesters, then when legal privilege applies, then they definitely can't do it, and they themselves can't be prescribed, and neither can any political parties. So that is an interesting question. But anyway, coming back to this, right, I didn't really want this video to be really, really long, and it's ended up being really long. This treason part here, for high treason, the first thing that came to my mind, and this is really what I wanted to make this video about, but I've been talking for 11 minutes now, and I've kind of, I suppose, gone off track, right? Basically, right, it says that killing the, the husband or wife of a prince, right, is treason. Now, as soon as I read that on this high treason, in fact, it's right at the start here in high treason. As soon as I read that, basically, killing the wife or husband of a prince, right, qualifies for high treason. And here's a little kind of like he's just done a little pictorial thing of it now. As soon as I read that for high treason, right, if you kill the husband or wife of a prince, that's high treason. Straight away, right, the first thing that popped into my mind was Princess Diana, right? I'm like, oh, Princess Diana got killed, didn't she? Right? 31st of August, 1997, right? In a high-speed car crash. Now, a lot of people have been officially made programmes about this, and they've been criticising whether it was a setup, whether it was staged, did she actually die or not? Or, did the paparazzi followed her, right? And then she was racing, and then it was all about, there was a programme all about the driver, the chauffeur, was whether he was drunk or not, and whether he'd been drinking, right? And this is the thing. Now, Andrew Bridgen, the MP, he said in a programme, and this is how I found out about this, Andrew Bridgen said in an interview programme, a YouTube video or whatever, he said that the first law that Tony Blair ever got put through government when he became Prime Minister in a Labour government was to abolish the death penalty for treason. So he didn't get rid of the offence, but he abolished the death penalty for treason, right? Now, that's very interesting, because I actually didn't know that Tony Blair had been an MP since 1983, right? I just thought Tony Blair was one of these, like, new sort of, like, up-and-coming sort of, contemporary MPs who just was kind of like, savvy and with it, and he got into government and then quickly became Prime Minister, right? I didn't know that he'd been an MP, a normal member of Parliament, right? Just Tony Blair MP, right? For 19 years. So Tony Blair actually had 19 years in government, which is quite a long time with Gordon Brown. They've been in the Labour Party for 19 years, a very, very long time. And then as soon as he became, so he'd had a lot of time to think about this, think about exactly what he wanted to do, think about what laws he wanted to make and change, and he was very familiar with the processes and proceedings of Parliament. He should have actually known, and also he was remember he'd been to Lincoln's Inn or Gray's Inn or whatever, but for employment law, not constitutional law, but, there's no MP who's served for 19 years who isn't knowledgeable about constitutional law. He must have, Tony Blair, if he went to, Lincoln's Inn or Gray's Inn, whatever, he's got to have read this Edward Coke book series. You don't go Oxford or Cambridge level, that level of law in any field of law, and become an MP and not be interested in books like this. He's got to have read these institutes, right? He's got to have known them, right? So he becomes Prime Minister in May 1997. May 2nd of May 1997, Tony Blair becomes Prime Minister, and the first law that they work on or put through is to abolish the death penalty for treason, right? Now, don't you think that it's astounding that in all of history, you could have, this final bastion of, law in England for death penalty, right? They abolished the death penalty for murder. This death penalty for treason they got, and it finally gets abolished, which is quite a monumental thing, particularly concerning one man, right? Tony Blair, right? When he gets into government and becomes a Prime Minister, and then April, May, June, July, August, 3 months later, I wonder if he had got a law put through Parliament within those 3 months, or whether it was just after. Do you see, this is what Andrew Bridgen didn't say. If Andrew Bridgen would have said, hey, the first law that Tony Blair put through on the 2nd of May 1997, the first thing that he worked on after he became Prime Minister was to abolish the death penalty for treason. Do you know that, the death or killing of, the prince or his, wife is treason offence, like in that, Princess Diana died and got killed. What are the circumstances around that? Could the French paparazzi who were chasing them, who surely they contributed to or caused them to crash or wanted them to run away from, well, they wanted to try to get photographs of them, right? Now, either they did cause it or not, right? At the end of the day, now this is the thing, the Chancellor and the Treasurer and the Justices, right, you've got to kill them while they're in office, which is for parliamentary matters and causes, right? It's got to be connected to their service in office in government, right? Not like, just happen to, he's on holiday and you watch around the corner and you end up, walking into him and he dies, right? That's different. But for the royals, right, it doesn't have to be because of their service or office. It's just killing their personage, right? It's just like their actual personage, right? They don't have to be, particularly doing something for the government or not. It's just because they are that, the princess or the prince or whatever, or because, so that Diana incident, right? Those paparazzi, it doesn't matter whether Diana was in a private capacity or not, right? She either was Princess Diana or she wasn't. It doesn't matter whether she was doing something on behalf of the government or in her own private life, right? Now, this is the thing. It's encompassing the death, right? It's actually imagining and encompassing the death, right? But this is the thing. Compassing means, like, in order to somehow, to manifest it by some sort of I don't know what words to use here, whether it's like plan, imagination, or process or whatever, to seek it out or to pursue. I think that's the word. I think that could be a good word, pursue, right? To pursue it, right? Now, were these paparazzi therefore? I don't think those French paparazzi have ever been charged with treason, because at the end of the day, right, they were chasing after, if they were pursuing Diana, who was attempting to get away from them, right? If Diana was attempting to get away from that paparazzi, right, then she was attempting to escape or evade them, right? And if they were pursuing her, knowing that she was trying to get away from them, and she died, right, then this is the thing. the paparazzi knew that she was attempting to get away from them, right? But they continued to pursue her, and apparently, it was going at high speed. Now, whether or not this driver or not was, whether the driver was sober or not, whatever his state was, a lot of the investigation, the program I saw, put it on the driver. Was he driving without due care and attention? Had he been drinking and so forth? I don't really think that they put much attention or concern or responsibility on those paparazzi, right? It was when they were saying, oh no, when they got her from the car, she was alive, but then when she got to hospital, when she died later on or whatever. This is a thing though. Look, right, if some paparazzi are chasing someone and they don't want to be chased, therefore they are running away to escape them, and then an accident happens because of that, right? If someone has an accident and dies because they are running away from someone or something, right, then that person they are running away or running from, being that they are continuing to pursue them, right, then they have caused it or contributed to it, right? That's a fact. I've just seen Mark Rowley in an interview, right, saying, oh, I'm going to go by facts, Well, here's a fact for you, right? Because of being pursued by paparazzi, Princess Diana, had to basically flee, right? Fleeing from paparazzi in order to escape, right? The paparazzi, knowing that, they were attempting to escape from them, continued to pursue them, right? And, that surely, if that wasn't the cause of the incident, I don't know what was. You still know what caused the incident was the driver. He was drunk and he couldn't steer properly or he couldn't see properly, and that was the cause of the accident, or the speed was the cause. No, right? Question. If the paparazzi had not been pursuing them, and if they had not been fleeing from them, would there have been an incident? Right? Question. That's a question for Mark Rowley. If someone wasn't fleeing from the paparazzi, and if the paparazzi weren't pursuing someone, right, would there have been an accident? The answer is likely to be no, right? Because they wouldn't have had to drive so fast, and they wouldn't have been, rushing. They wouldn't have actually been, they wouldn't have been being pursued. If you weren't being pursued, right, and you weren't trying to escape, then you probably wouldn't have had an accident, right? So this is the thing. I don't think those paparazzi were ever charged with treason, because they surely caused the death of Diana. And that's a treason offence here. And 3 months earlier, put a marker on a map, stick a pin in the map, right? Anywhere in history you want in a map. What a coincidence, within 3 months of Tony Blair becoming Prime Minister, take away the death penalty for treason, right? And Princess... Now, I need to check to see when he actually got that law put through. What date the law got put through. In fact, hold on, I'll just pause it now. Right, well, Google's not giving me the proper answer, but it's giving me a similar answer. It says, I've got some kind of rough dates here, right? It says that the first law to receive royal assent under Tony Blair's government, they're saying it was the National Health Service Private Finance Act 1997, right? They're saying it was that, but I know that Andrew Bridgen said that it was to abolish the death penalty, right? But it says that it was given royal assent on the 15th of May 1997. So if Andrew Bridgen was telling the truth and if he was right, then that death penalty was actually abolished before the 15th of May 1997, because it was the first thing that Tony Blair did, right? But that's how fast they were getting things given assent. So we're looking at somewhere around May 1997, if it's one of the first things that Tony Blair actually did. I don't know if we can get the question for the actual the death penalty for treason. Let's see if we can try and get it. Nah, I don't want to. It doesn't want to say when the death penalty was abolished for it, but we're looking at May 1997 for something getting through government. Tony Blair became Prime Minister on the 2nd of May, so he was getting things done straight away. If he became Prime Minister on the 2nd of May, he was getting things put through in May, right? So I don't know whether he did it. It must have got put through before August. So, but either way, there's got to be a connection in this, right? How often is it ever in the history of England, right, when you have a actual royal die? If you actually have a member of the royal family die, actually not through natural old age, just, by some death or freak incident or like maybe in war or, whatever, however, it's extremely rare, right? Particularly in England, like very, very, very rare. And how often is it when, they abolish, like, the last death penalty remaining in England, because he got rid of I think it was 1970, it was around 1969, 70, 71, when they got rid of the death penalty for murder. It cannot be a coincidence that Tony Blair did that, and then literally within three months is this Diana incident, which would have been treason and should be treason, really. But why weren't the paparazzi charged with treason of the British government for chasing after her, even if there was no death penalty? Even if there wasn't a death penalty for treason, right? Even if there wasn't a death penalty for treason, because those paparazzi did actually cause Diana to flee and need to continue fleeing. So that is cause of death. What is cause of death is, fight or flight. It's a fight or flight incident causing a death. It's fight or flight causing a death due to paparazzi. So why weren't the French paparazzi charged with treason of the English monarch, and even if there's no death penalty, put in prison? But they weren't, were they? They actually weren't, mysteriously. Now, this is the thing. The whole Diana incident, she was accused of consorting with that Dodi Al-Fayed or whatever and all that, So were they accusing, Diana of treason herself? Was Diana otherwise accused of treason and should have been put to the death penalty for Dodi Al-Fayed? Now, that whole Dodi Al-Fayed thing, whether Princess Diana, was consorting with the enemy, apparently, he's not exactly the enemy if he's got a Harrods shop, If he's got a shop in London called Harrods, if he was the enemy, he wouldn't be opening a Harrods shop in Empire in London, would he? Like, the Al-Fayed family. So they can't exactly be the enemies of England when they've got a high-class, state contemporary, affluent shopping experience in London, right? So this is the thing. She was hardly consorting with the enemy. So this seems very, very, very. There's something in this to do with that death penalty thing and treason and Tony Blair repealing that law and the fact that it's Diana. The whole kind of thing, the whole orchestration of the thing. But what's clarified it for me is, doing things like. It's just helped to clarify this treason offence, because I thought it extended to things like, falsifying evidence against the country and stuff like that. But most of the things that we're accusing the police of doing and the courts and the justices are all contempts. They're all contempts of the country. The third is levying war against the king. But this is the thing, when there's mass contempts and when they're disrupting the political process or obstructing the political process as a group, as a body, when if all the courts are working together, if all the Crown Prosecution Service and police are acting as a body against the people, right, that really would fall under the Terrorism Act as an offence, but they haven't been prescribed as a terrorist organisation. But this is the thing about the Terrorism Act. Do you need to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation, right, to commit terror offences to disrupt the political process? And the question is, see, under those terrorism offence acts, under the terrorism offence offences. I think that, that it's like when you don't get to have a lawyer, or they can lock you up for a certain amount of time without a trial, and, you can't see your lawyer and all this type of thing, and you got to answer questions. Like they had George Galloway, like basically in the airport, and he had to answer certain questions, and he had to give answers to them, even though he wasn't under arrest and things like that. It's very concerning when we get to this situation when you've got, like Brian Leaveson's a judge and he's in charge of investigatory powers, and then you've got like all the police have definitely been arresting people unlawfully when they should have known, the political rights properly. They've got access to books, to King's Counsel. Are these just contempt, or is it more? Have they been acting in terrorism, even though they're not prescribed? So there's some questions here. There's a few other things I want to read in this, like there are some offences to do with Egyptians and all kinds of things. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn would be right impressed with some of those, but it's actually got things to do with some stuff to do with the Right Act as well. But I just wanted to basically point out this, that, what are the high treason offences? But also giving it, one of these high treason offences is giving comfort, right, and basically harbouring the enemy. So if it's an enemy of the king, if it's an enemy of the king or the country, and if you like look after them in this country, that's a treason offence. Now, this is where I think Keir Starmer has been. Everyone is complaining and kicking off now about all these illegal immigrants, unlawful immigrants in the country, right? They're not lawful. Now, Ukraine is meant to be an ally because it's part of the United Nations, right? And they're fighting Russia. Now, this is the thing. Are Russians allowed in England at the moment? If Keir Starmer actually officially declared war with Russia, right? Is it, would everyone who was Russian in this country be under arrest? Unless, and I know there's Russian people who emigrated to England and, took English citizenship, right? Obviously they wouldn't, but this is the thing, right? I don't know if an average normal Russian citizen can be in England when we're at war with Russia, or if it has to be a member of the Russian army, like a Russian soldier. But effectively, right, this is the thing. All these Ukrainians, war, all these war victims who were coming over, right? But then you've got all the actually immigrants who are coming in unlawfully, etc., and so forth. Now, this is the thing. If we were at war with any of those countries, then by looking after them, it actually would be treason, not just criminal, it actually would be treason. But this is the thing. What Keir Starmer and this government are doing at the moment is they're actually putting up all these hotels and they're actually harbouring all these people because of a war, right? But they're here unlawfully. They're actually here unlawfully. So that makes them into criminals. Now, when you're criminal, you're an illegal. You're illegal and you're not lawful. Now, if there is a large number of unlawfuls, if there's a large number of illegals, isn't that a body? Aren't foreign people who are acting illegally as a body being in this country, right? Being harboured because you're an enemy of the country when you're a criminal, right? Criminals are enemies of the country, surely, and it's even worse when they're foreign criminals, right? So surely, and this is the irony, I think, of what Keir Starmer's doing, and I've only just kind of clicked on this now, right? Because this is when I think the Labour Party are just basically giving us the, two fingers, the rods, the middle finger, saying fuck you to everyone because we're all, because everyone doesn't like Keir Starmer and everyone's complaining about him, right? I am absolutely certain, right, that surely a body of criminals who aren't even meant to be in this country, right, are an enemy of this country because they're here illegally, unlawfully, and they're a body. So that surely is giving them comfort, right? giving them comfort and looking after them in this country, that's treason. So surely what the Labour Party are actually, the ideology of what Labour Party are doing is like, oh, there's all these foreign people, right, who aren't lawfully allowed to be in England without a passport, and they came here illegally, right? That actually isn't an illegal. It's an illegal invasion against the law. An illegal invasion against the law, right? Giving comfort and looking after them, harbouring them, is actually a treason offence. And this is something that the Fast Jet Performance channel, right, who is ex-military, and you've got that Ant Middleton as well, should actually understand this. What Starmer is doing and what the Labour Party are doing to these illegal people who are unlawfully here is actually really falling into the treason offence. Now, this is the thing. With all this whole Ukraine and NATO and the United Nations and everything like that, and Putin, and the Americans not being happy with neither Zelensky nor Putin nor Iraq and Iran or anything like that, right? You're getting to the situation where, because we've got all these complicated wars, right, in the Middle East and with Ukraine, etc., and when there are many, many people coming to this country we don't know which country they're from, because, to be honest, I admit I haven't got a fucking clue what's going on with Iraq and Iran and Palestine and all that. I don't even, I know people are right into it, right? Like Jeremy Corbyn and some of these other people are really onto it, right? Some of the news groups. But if they're coming over and some of them don't have passports, right? You don't actually really know which country they're from. There's no evidence for that from what they tell you, right? And some of these countries, right, we are at war with, or there's a war on. And when they're coming over and they've been looked after in hotels, that falls within these treason offences here. And this is where the Labour Party and Keir Starmer, already illegally knowing that their own Crown Prosecution Service in this country are prosecuting our protesters illegally and criminally, right, which is contempt, and the Crown Prosecution Service are doing that, which is contempt, and the justices are doing that, which is contempt, and the police are doing that, which is contempt to Mark Rowley, and those contempt offences can only be heard in Parliament, right, not in any of the other courts, so there's absolutely no justice at all, right? There's no justice whatsoever being had. They're not actually being held to account for justice. On top of that, right, our own country are kicking us in the balls. The police are acting against its own people illegally, right? On top of that, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and all these Labour muppet boffins in government now, everyone's going absolutely mental about, right, because they can't stand what they're doing, and they're putting all these insane laws through, and they're going for this Agenda 2030 full-on surveillance facial recognition, right? They are arranging and putting up these actually hotels to look after and give comfort to all these people who we don't even know where they're from. So some of them could be our enemies. Now, that's actually treason. Now, I think Keir Starmer's doing it on purpose to be a git, right? He's going, hey, what's the worst we can do? Like what Tony Blair did, right? We take away the death penalty for treason, right? What Keir Starmer's doing, right, is what is the worst thing that Keir Starmer could possibly do, right? Besides literally kicking you in the testicles, right? What could cause the most pain, suffering, or damage, right, to the body, rather than grabbing your nipple and actually twisting it, right, to cause pain, right? Keir Starmer, what he's actually doing to us in the law of England is he's breaking the law. And he's not only breaking the law, he's being a git, right? And he's intentionally, purposefully breaking it to the most serious possible way that he could break it, right? on purpose, like grabbing hold of the nipple and twisting the nipple of the UK, right? And that is the putting up of, potentially large numbers of enemies of the country, right? And, Jeremy Corbyn, this is the thing that, Jeremy Corbyn and me are completely in disagreement on and opposed to, because I completely support, Jeremy Corbyn and Donald Trump couldn't be at further opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And I fully support Jeremy Corbyn when it comes to, public-owned services, public-owned electricity and, postal service and bus companies, and, not having all these elites with all this power when they've been in a position where they can use all this AI technology, get all of our data. They've completely and totally broken the European Union law of the privacy, right? The right to privacy. And they've done it from outside of Europe. They've come in from America, Mark Zuckerberg and all these big platforms, Google, and the government have actually welcomed it and loved it. And the government are promoting these platforms on their website, on their MP contact pages, which is similar type of thing. That is like, you've got to understand that what our government are doing by not holding contempt proceedings, and they should be having contempt proceedings against Google, YouTube, Facebook, and all these platforms for taking down our material when it was privileged, right? That's contempt. These big platforms from America and China are in contempt of British law and the European law of the right to privacy. But what instead they've done is, because of that Section 230, mainly in America, right, that Section 230 law and stuff like that, right, and just the fact that, Larry Ellison and Oracle and Mark Zuckerberg are all tech geeks and they think that they know better than everyone else, but actually when it comes to international law, they don't, right? Our government have welcomed these platforms into England to like Trojans, and they've signed up for it, and they've all gone on these platforms illegally against election law, promoted themselves while we've been getting taken down. So that is massive contempt and election law offences, right, against us. And then they've used the police force, CPS and courts to prosecute us, the citizens, illegally, which is all massive amounts of contempt, could amount to terrorism possibly as well. And they're promoting those platforms on their websites. Now, using and promoting those platforms on their websites when they've been acting in contempt against us and breaking the EU right to privacy law by giving all our data to these third parties for profit, right? You've got to understand that is actually a little bit similar to inviting all these foreign illegals in and letting them be here and giving them hotels, right? Because that's treason. Having all these foreign immigrants coming to England, right, when they haven't got passports and when they're here unlawfully and when there's wars on potentially some of the countries where they're coming from, they could actually be foreign enemies, and giving them comfort and lodgings in this country, that's treason, right? And that's a little bit like what they're doing with these big platforms. These big platforms are acting unlawfully in contempt against this country. And the government are actually saying, hey, we like this, what you're doing. we'll like you and what you're doing, and we're going to advertise you on our government contact pages. It's almost like putting up these illegal foreigners in the hotels, right? And everyone's just like, doesn't have a fucking clue what's going on with this, right? And the other part of this is this, right? So for these treason offences, why it says at the start of these high treason offences that if anyone's found to be guilty of high treason in a court of law in England, right, they can't actually be charged or prosecuted of it until the matter has gone to Parliament. It says here, now I know that this is not the current Treason Act or the current treason law or the modern one, right? But I want to say this in a historical context, just so you know that where it comes from, where does this idea come from, right? Well, this is a thing. So because treason is such a serious and high crime and matter, but the thing with it is that these treason offences have to involve political things or political matters, right? because they concern the king or the royals or an act against the country, right? When we are doing political causes and campaigns, the court can't hear it. The court can't hear it because it's matters and causes to Parliament. But the court have been hearing them, but they weren't meant to hear them, right? So the court's got to, it's like petition of leave of court. It's exactly the same thing as petition of leave of court, right? The court's got to go to Parliament to ask for permission because treason involves matters and causes of the nation, the state, like, against the king or the country. So the courts can't even hear it according to this originally until it goes to Parliament. So it becomes a matter of Parliament, right? And this is the thing with all the prosecutions against us. The courts aren't actually meant to hear them, without leave of court, and it's meant to be a matter of Parliament. So there's actually a connection between our cases and the type of offence that the treason is, because they're all meant to go to Parliament, right?